For years, Clara had lived what seemed like a dream: an apartment with high rise views, tastefully decorated rooms, and a life that felt as flawless as the glossy pages of a magazine. But now, the apartment that once felt like a sanctuary felt suffocating. Her marriage to Aaron, once full of laughter and promise, had crumbled. She hadn't seen it coming. Not really. The whispered arguments, the long silences, the phone calls Aaron would take in another room. She had convinced herself that it was just the stresses of life. But the truth, harsh and painful, was now undeniable. And then, one evening, a message appeared on her phone, shattering her fragile sense of control. It was from a number she didn't recognize, but the message was unmistakable. "Clara, you need to leave. This is Aaron's girlfriend. You don't belong here anymore." Her heart pounded as she stared at the screen, the words blurring. The room spun. She'd known something was wrong. But this was the breaking point. The reality of her marriage. The man she had given everything to now stood before her in pieces. What had happened to the life they built together? The truth was finally clear, and Clara had no idea how she was going to pick up the pieces. When Clara first met Aaron, it felt like a fairy tale. Their connection was instant, magnetic, something deeper than words could explain. They were young, successful, and in love, and the world seemed to conspire in their favor. Together, they bought a sleek, modern apartment in the heart of the city, a symbol of their achievements and their future. The tall windows looked out over the skyline, and inside, every room was decorated with an elegance that mirrored their growing success. They spent weekends traveling, sipping wine on balconies with sweeping views, always side by side. Aaron was a rising star in his career, and Clara, an ambitious entrepreneur, thrived in her own right. Their life together was the perfect blend of ambition, love, and style. It felt like they were on top of the world, unstoppable, unbreakable. But looking back now, Clara realized she had ignored the cracks, the subtle shifts, the long hours Aaron worked, the occasional coldness in his eyes when he looked at her, the distance that crept in when they were alone. They were small things, easy to overlook in the grand scheme of things. They seemed insignificant against the backdrop of their perfect life. Yet deep down, Clara knew there had been signs, quiet warnings that something was shifting, slowly but surely. She had convinced herself that it was just part of life's rhythm. But now she understood it for what it was: a silent unraveling. It started with small things. At first, Clara brushed them off as nothing more than the ebb and flow of a busy life. Aaron, always the workaholic, had begun taking more and more late-night calls. At first, they were just work-related, or so he claimed. But after a while, Clara noticed something odd: the sudden, unexplained urgency in his tone, a shift in the rhythm of their home. One evening, she sat across from him in their living room, watching him stare intently at his phone screen, his fingers moving rapidly, as if in a hurry. He barely noticed her watching him. She asked casually, "Who's that?" "A client," he replied, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. It was too quick, too rehearsed. The next day, Clara found his phone left unattended, face up on the kitchen counter. A missed call from a number she didn't recognize. She hesitated, staring at it for a moment before quickly averting her eyes. It was probably just a colleague, she reasoned, or maybe one of his old friends. But when the same number popped up again the next night, Clara couldn't help the knot of unease in her stomach. When she confronted him about it, he brushed it off. "You're imagining things, Clara. It's just work stress. Nothing to worry about," he'd said with a smile, as if he could erase the doubt lingering in her mind. She wanted to believe him. She had to believe him. After all, everything had been so perfect. This couldn't be real. But as the missed calls kept coming, and the odd behaviors increased, Clara found herself questioning everything. She wanted to ignore it, but the signs were there. Something was off. Something had changed. The uncertainty began to grow, a shadow darkening their once bright, shared world. The moment Clara confronted Aaron was not one she could ever forget. The house felt eerily quiet, the tension heavy between them. She had gathered all the strength she could muster, holding the evidence in her hand, the phone number that had appeared over and over again. Her breath caught in her throat as she asked, "Who is she?" Aaron froze, his face draining of color. His eyes flickered to the floor, unable to meet hers. In that instant, Clara felt her heart shatter, but she still didn't understand the depth of what was happening. "Who is she, Aaron?" she asked again, her voice barely a whisper. "Aaron, please, tell me this isn't true." He ran a hand through his hair, frustration building. "Clara, it's complicated," he started, but the words sounded empty. The way he avoided her gaze, the way he faltered, told her everything. She felt the walls of their perfect life crumbling around her. Her world tilted, and it took all her strength just to stay standing. It wasn't just a mistake. It wasn't just a misunderstanding. "I've been seeing someone else," Aaron admitted, his voice hollow, as if he had already detached himself from the weight of his betrayal. Clara's knees buckled, and she collapsed into the couch. "How long?" she managed to choke out. "Almost a year," Aaron whispered, his voice trembling, but it was too late for apologies. Clara's mind raced, spiraling out of control. A year? All those nights when he'd come home late, acting distant, promising it was work. How long had she been living a lie? She felt sick, her chest tight with a pain so deep, so raw, it seemed to crush her from the inside. The reality of the situation was impossible to grasp. She had loved him so completely, so blindly. And now, the life they had built together was a facade. But there was something else gnawing at her, a truth she could not escape. She was pregnant. The thought of breaking up the family sent waves of panic through her. She had always dreamed of raising a child in a home full of love. She didn't want her baby to grow up in a broken home. And yet, here she was, trapped in the betrayal of a man she thought she knew. "Please, Clara." "I'm sorry," Aaron pleaded, but his words were hollow. They no longer held the same weight. But Clara couldn't hear him. All she could hear was the ringing in her ears, the realization that the man she had trusted with her heart had shattered it beyond repair. This wasn't a phase. It wasn't a mistake. This was the truth. The weight of it pressed down on her, and she understood, in that moment, that nothing would ever be the same again. Clara's heart sank as Aaron led the woman into their living room. The woman was tall, with sleek dark hair and an air of confidence Clara had never seen in anyone who entered their home. "This is Mirabelle," Aaron said, his voice far too casual, as if introducing a colleague, not the person he had been seeing behind her back. Clara stood frozen, unable to process the scene before her. Her body was numb, but her mind was racing. He wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. The woman sat down on the couch as if it was her rightful place, her eyes locking onto Clara's with a mixture of pity and superiority. Aaron continued, his words now hitting Clara like cold daggers. "Clara, I think it's time we talked about the next steps. I want a divorce." Her breath caught in her throat. The room seemed to shrink, the walls closing in around her. The life they had built, the family she thought they were, suddenly felt like it was dissolving in front of her eyes. She turned to Aaron, her voice cracking. "You're serious? You want to divorce me? For her?" He nodded. "I never meant for it to happen this way, but I've made my decision." Clara felt like she was suffocating. How had this happened? How had she missed the signs? And yet, in the back of her mind, she couldn't shake the belief that she could still fix it. Maybe this was just a phase. Maybe they could go to therapy. Maybe they could salvage what was left. But the reality was cruel. She felt her own powerlessness, an inner struggle between fighting for their marriage and walking away to protect herself from more heartbreak. And as the weight of his betrayal sunk in deeper, Clara's thoughts turned to the life they had shared, the apartment, the business they had built together. He might be done with her, but she knew he wouldn't let go of those things easily. There was more at stake now than just their relationship. There was a power struggle looming over their shared assets, and Clara wasn't sure how to play her hand. The message arrived late one night. As Clara sat in the dimly lit apartment, the weight of the day pressing on her chest. The screen glowed with a single line of text. Clara, this is Mirabelle. I'm asking you to leave the apartment. It's meant for me and Tom now. You don't belong here anymore. Her hand trembled as she read the words over and over again, as if expecting them to change, to make sense. But they didn't. It was as if the woman was staking her claim, not just on Aaron, but on the life they had once shared. Clara's stomach twisted with disbelief. She had already been betrayed once, but now this. This was the final blow. Clara's emotions spun into a frenzy. Anger, humiliation, fear. How could this woman, a stranger just months ago, be so bold, so unashamed? She was demanding Clara's home, her life. It felt like an invasion. But it wasn't just the apartment. It was her sense of self, her world, crumbling away, piece by piece. Mirabelle's words cut deeper than anything Aaron had said. The assumption that Clara would just give up, pack her things, and leave. It stung. Was this really her life now? Was she going to be forced out of the home she had helped create, her sanctuary turned battlefield? The apartment felt colder, the walls suddenly unfamiliar. Clara stood there for what seemed like an eternity, her breath shallow as the realization sank in. This was serious. Her life as she knew it was ending. It wasn't just about Aaron anymore. It was about everything. Her future, her family, and the life she'd dreamed of. And now it was slipping through her fingers faster than she could hold on. Clara stood in the middle of their bedroom, staring at the empty boxes scattered around the floor. Each one seemed to mock her, each one a reminder of the life she had built with Aaron, a life she never thought she'd have to walk away from. She ran her hand along the edge of the dresser, her fingers brushing over the small trinkets they had collected over the years. Every item had a memory attached. Their first vacation together, their wedding day, the quiet mornings when they had shared a cup of coffee and talked about the future. She remembered the early days of their marriage, how they had talked for hours about dreams and plans, their future stretching out before them like an endless horizon. She had trusted him completely, believed that the love they shared would always be enough to overcome anything. But now, all of that seemed like a distant memory, shattered by the betrayal that had come crashing into her life. Her heart ached as she looked around at the familiar walls. This had been their home, the place where they had laughed, cried, and built their future. And now, she was supposed to leave. She had to leave. The apartment wasn't hers anymore. Mirabelle had claimed it, and Aaron, her husband, had agreed. Clara fought against the rush of panic in her chest. She couldn't lose her child's stability. She couldn't let her little one grow up in a broken home, torn between two worlds. But how could she hold on to what was slipping away so quickly? The struggle to leave was a battle between the love she still had for her family and the painful reality that nothing would ever be the same again. As Clara folded another shirt and placed it into a box, a spark of determination ignited deep within her. She wasn't just going to pack up and walk away quietly. She wasn't going to let Aaron and Mirabelle take everything from her without a fight. This wasn't just about losing a man. It was about losing her life, her home. and her dignity. And that, she realized, was not something she could allow. The thought of letting them win, of quietly walking out of the apartment, made her blood boil. Numbers she had been blindsided, humiliated, and betrayed, but she wasn't going to let them erase everything they'd built together. Aaron may have already made his decision, but Clara wasn't finished yet. She stood tall, taking a deep breath. The overwhelming grief, the weight of the past few days, didn't feel quite as suffocating now. It was replaced by a surge of clarity. She would fight for what was hers, for the life she had worked so hard to create. She'd made sacrifices for this marriage, for the family they were supposed to be, and she wasn't going to let it be torn apart without making sure they realized the cost. She wasn't going to leave quietly. She would take control of her future, even if it meant confronting Aaron and Mirabel head-on. She wasn't sure what the next step would be, but she knew this. She wouldn't go down without a fight. She would stand up for herself, for her child, and for the life that they deserved. Clara's heart was heavy, but for the first time in days, she felt a flicker of strength. She was not going to let them destroy everything she had worked for. Not without a reckoning. Certainly. Here's the outline revised according to the policy guidelines. Clara stood at the door, her heart pounding as Aaron, alongside Mirabel, walked in. The sight of them together was like a cruel punch to her stomach. The apartment, which had once been filled with the laughter and love of their family, now felt like a battleground. Aaron spoke first, casually, as though the situation was normal. He told Clara it was time for her to leave, without any regard for the years they had spent building their life together. Mirabel, looking smug and self-assured, agreed with him, making it clear that this apartment was now theirs. The way they stood, so comfortably together, only served to highlight how much they believed they had won. But Clara refused to let them see her crumble. She stood her ground, refusing to leave. Her voice was steady, but beneath it was a current of strength that neither Aaron nor Mirabel expected. Mirabel, taken aback by Clara's composure, taunted her about how pathetic it was to still hold on to a marriage that was clearly over. But Clara didn't flinch. She was done being pushed around. With an unwavering gaze, Clara revealed a shocking truth. The apartment wasn't Aaron's to claim. It was hers. It had been purchased long before Aaron ever entered her life. The power of those words hit the room like a bombshell, leaving both of them speechless. For the first time, Clara could see the doubt in their eyes, the realization that things were not as simple as they had thought. Clara's revelation about the apartment's true ownership stunned both Aaron and Mirabel. The pride they had taken in taking over the space, believing it was their victory, evaporated as Clara calmly explained that the apartment had always been in her name, purchased before she had even met Aaron. This revelation threw them off balance. Mirabel, who had looked so certain just moments ago, now stood there, her expression faltering. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words didn't come. Aaron, equally stunned, had no response. The power dynamics shifted in an instant. Clara wasn't just defending her home. She was asserting control over her life in a way neither of them expected. Clara didn't need to say more. The silence that followed was heavy with uncertainty, leaving both Aaron and Mirabel unsure of what would come next. Clara had shown them that they were not the ones in charge, and she was no longer the woman they thought they could easily push around. She wasn't just protecting the apartment. She was reclaiming her life, and this was just the beginning. The conversation quickly shifted from the apartment to the possessions within it. Mirabel, still brimming with false confidence, began eyeing the art collection that adorned the walls. "You know, we could really use these to make our new life more comfortable," she said casually, as if they were just another set of things to be claimed. Aaron, too, nodded, agreeing with her suggestion. "I've always thought some of these pieces could fetch a lot on the market," he added, his tone making it clear they had already decided the art was theirs to take. Clara's stomach churned at the thought of them stealing the treasures they had collected together. Her fingers clenched into fists, but she kept her composure, facing them with unwavering resolve. "That art collection is mine," Clara said coldly, her voice cutting through their discussion like a blade. "It was my gift to myself, my investment. I'm not selling it, and you're not taking it." Mirabelle looked at her as if she were a child throwing a tantrum. "Oh, come on. It's just art. We could sell it, start fresh," she said dismissively. Clara's eyes locked on hers. "You can't sell what doesn't belong to you," she retorted firmly. "You have no claim to it, and neither does Tom. Those pieces are worth far more than you realize, and I won't let you profit from them. Not now, not ever." A tense silence filled the room, the weight of her words sinking in. Aaron shifted uncomfortably, as if the thought of the art's value was just now dawning on him. Clara knew the collection was worth a small fortune. It wasn't just sentimental, it was a true asset, and she wasn't about to let them take that from her, too. Clara took a deep breath, gathering the strength to drop yet another bombshell. She wasn't done exposing the lies. "You think you're marrying some rich guy, Mirabelle?" "Think again," Clara said, her voice steady but cutting. Mirabelle looked confused, her eyes narrowing in disbelief. "What are you talking about?" she asked, clearly not understanding what Clara was getting at. Clara turned to Tom, her eyes burning with the truth he'd hidden for so long. Tom has always played the part of the successful businessman, but the reality is very different. She let the words hang in the air for a moment before continuing. "You know all those lavish dinners, the vacations, the expensive gifts? He wasn't paying for any of it. I was. He's been living off me and my wealth for years." Mirabelle's face drained of color as the truth set in. "What?" she whispered, her voice cracking with disbelief. Clara's gaze never left Tom, her eyes now a mirror of the betrayal she felt. "You've been lying to her, Tom, all this time, pretending to be someone you're not. You're not rich. You never were. I supported your entire lifestyle, the business, everything." The weight of the revelation hit like a freight train. Mirabelle's jaw dropped, her eyes flickering between Clara and Tom, searching for some explanation, but there was none. Tom, visibly shaken, opened his mouth but had no words. His carefully crafted image of success was crumbling in front of him. Clara had turned the tables. The truth was out now, and Mirabelle, the woman who thought she had found her golden ticket, was left stunned, unable to process what she had just heard. The tension in the room thickened as the truth sunk in, leaving Tom exposed and vulnerable. Clara stood taller than ever, no longer hiding behind the veil of deceit. She had taken control of her life, and now she was exposing Tom for the fraud he truly was. Tom stood there, his face flushed with a mix of anger and frustration. "You don't understand, Clara. This isn't what I wanted. His voice cracked as he tried to make himself sound like the victim. But Clara wasn't having it anymore. Her heart hardened at the sight of him, still trying to manipulate the situation. His words, his pleas, they all felt like empty noise now. She had listened to him for years, supported him, and been there when he needed her. And for what? To watch him destroy everything, including the trust they once shared. "I understand perfectly," Clara interrupted, her voice icy. "I understand that you've lied to me, manipulated me, and used me. And I'm done." She stood tall, her posture unyielding as the reality of the situation settled around them. "I'm done with you, Tom. You're on your own now. Don't ever try to manipulate me again." The silence between them was thick, charged with the weight of her final words. She could see the flicker of panic in his eyes, but she didn't care anymore. Tom had created this mess, and now it was his turn to deal with the consequences. As the reality of their crumbling marriage set in, Clara calmly laid out the grim truth. You've got nothing left. No money, no support. And Mirabelle, she's not going to save you. She's stuck with you now, just like I was. The words hit Tom like a slap to the face. His carefully constructed world was falling apart. He was penniless, with no one left to turn to except Mirabelle, who was only interested in what she could get out of him. As Clara turned away, she could feel the weight of the finality settling in. Tom had made his choices. Now, he would face them alone. A few weeks after their last encounter, Clara received a call from Tom. His voice was different, pleading, desperate. Clara, I need your help. Please, just listen. I'm in serious trouble. Clara held the phone in her hand, her finger hovering over the end call button. Her first instinct was to hang up, but part of her curiosity, part of her need for closure, kept her on the line. What kind of trouble? She asked, her tone colder than it had been in days. Tom sighed deeply, the sound filled with regret. It's Mirabelle. She's run up a huge amount of debt, and now she's threatening to leave me. I can't handle it, Clara. I'm broke. I have nothing left. Please, just help me. Clara could hear the desperation in his voice, but it didn't move her. After everything he had done, she owed him nothing. You made your bed, Tom, she said bluntly. Now you have to lie in it. The silence on the other end was thick. Tom had no words, just a deep, resigned exhale. He knew she was right. He had brought this on himself. Mirabelle, it seemed, had no intentions of sticking around either. As the debts mounted, she grew increasingly angry and frustrated, and the relationship turned sour. Clara heard from mutual acquaintances that Mirabelle had begun pulling away, realizing that Tom was not the man she thought he was. When the pressure of the debts became too much to handle, Mirabelle did exactly what Clara had expected. She left him. Now, Tom was alone, penniless, and utterly dependent on the woman he had betrayed so many times. He had nothing left. Mirabelle was gone. His business was in shambles, and his life was a shadow of what he had promised it would be. The suspense of what would happen next lingered in the air. Would Tom ever get himself out of this mess, or had he finally hit rock bottom? Would he ever truly change? Clara didn't know, but one thing was certain. She wasn't waiting around to find out. As Clara sat on the balcony of her new apartment, the soft hum of the city around her felt peaceful, no longer suffocating as it once had. The weight of the past had lifted, and for the first time in a long while, she could breathe. She thought back to the pain, the heartache, the betrayal. But now, they felt like distant memories, fading into the background of a life that was no longer defined by them. Clara had rebuilt her world. Her new home, though smaller, felt full of possibilities. It was hers, every inch of it, and it was a reflection of the strength she had found within herself. She had created this life for herself and her daughter, and that sense of control, of independence, gave her a freedom she never thought possible. Her daughter, happily playing with her toys in the corner of the living room, was proof of how far they had come. The bond between them had only grown stronger, and Clara felt a deep sense of pride in the mother she had become. They had their own little world now, one full of love, laughter, and the kind of peace she had never imagined during the darkest days of her marriage. As Clara looked ahead, she knew the journey wasn't over. She still had challenges to face, but now they felt like opportunities rather than obstacles. She was thriving, emotionally, financially, and most importantly, as a woman who had finally found her strength. Letting go of the past had been the hardest part, but now Clara realized it was the only way to truly move forward. The future was hers to shape, and with her daughter by her side, nothing seemed impossible.